Today's video is about passports. Why do we even need passports, and why on earth do people like I have two identical ones? Which problems do I maybe face with them, and does it make sense for you to get a second one as well? That's what we'll talk about in today's video. By the way, my name's Philip. I have a background in business administration and currently work as a flight attendant, and I use some of my free time pursuing the goal of visiting every country in the world. And having visited around 120 countries so far, I do know a thing or two about passports. So let's dive in. So before we get into why it does maybe make sense to have two, let's quickly cover why passports exist in the first place, because I think it's really helpful to understand a bit of the background of all this. A passport serves two main purposes. Number one, proving citizenship, and number two, acting as a universally accepted form of identification for international travel. It's basically a letter from your government saying, this person is one of us, please let him in, and if there's a problem, contact our embassy. So without a passport, traveling internationally nowadays would be nearly impossible. But passports, especially the ones that we know today, weren't always standardized. The earliest known passport was a letter that dates back to around 450 BC when Nehemiah, an official to the king of Persia, received a letter from the king asking the governors of different regions to grant him safe passage. And then in the Middle Ages, European rulers issued travel documents to their people as well when more and more land was claimed by different colonies, and traveling through those lands suddenly required permissions. Sometimes these passports were also connected to requirements like having paid their taxes, which means that only the people that actually paid their taxes were able to travel. By the way, the word passports comes from the Italian passaporto, which means a permission to travel through a port. However, modern passports as we know them, the small booklets with a ton of security features, were only standardized in 1980 by the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. So that's the history. Now let's finally talk about why some people might need more than one of them. So of course, some people have two passports because they have two citizenships. This can be a huge advantage because certain passports allow easier access to different parts of the world. For example, with a US passport, you can travel to most of the countries around the world. Two big ones that are missing on the list, however, are Russia and China. With a second passport from, let's say, Brazil or Argentina, for example, Russia suddenly becomes visa-free for you. But what if you only have one citizenship, like I do? Well, that's where second passports of the same country come in. There are, of course, the people that have an emergency passport, a diplomatic passport, a service passport, or public affairs passport, but that's special stuff for special people. So let's instead talk about why normal people like me, and you probably, can get two as well. So I'm German, and with only having the German citizenships, I have two standard German passports. So let me explain you why. Certain countries really don't get along, and if they see a stamp from a country they dislike in your passport, they might want to do some additional questioning or can even deny you entry. For example, if you have an Israeli stamp in your passport, many Arab countries like Lebanon, Syria, or Kuwait, and also Iran, for example, might refuse you entry. And when I went to Syria, for example, the Syrian border official actually asked me and my friends if we'd ever been to occupied Palestine, which is what they call Israel. This is, by the way, why Israel doesn't stamp passports anymore. However, entry or exit stamps from Jordan, from the land border to Israel, for example, have the same effect. Azerbaijan and Armenia are also countries that have tense relations, and having a stamp from one of them can complicate entry into the other. And even China and Taiwan have some travel restrictions based on passport history. So with two passports, you can separate your travel history and then use one passport for the sensitive countries, and the other passport can stay free of problematic stamps. So this is one of the main reasons why some travelers, journalists, business professionals, and in general just frequent flyers apply for a second passport. So applying for a visa often requires you to send your passport to an embassy, which can take weeks, and if you travel a lot, this can be a major issue. For example, let's say I need a visa for some country in Africa, let's say Mali, which requires sending my passport to their embassy for processing. But at the same time, I have work trips that require international travel. I, for example, work as a flight attendant. I need my passport at least once or twice per week. Without a second passport, I'd be stuck waiting for my passport to be returned before I could go anywhere. With the second passport, however, I can send one off to visa processing and keep traveling with the other. So again, for flight attendants like me or other business professionals that do travel a lot as well, this can be a game changer. Losing your passport while traveling can be one of the most stressful experiences you can have. It can take days, sometimes weeks to get a new one depending on where you are, and if you lose your passport while abroad, having a second one can save you a lot of trouble. That's why I usually keep one in my bag or in the hotel room and the second one on me, so in case I get robbed or I lose my bag or something like that happens, I still have one to continue traveling with, or get back home if that's the goal. Some countries also issue you emergency passports, however, they are usually temporary and can't always be used for every country, so having a second full validity passport as a backup up can save you a lot of trouble if you travel often. By the way, if you've gotten any value out of this video until now, do hit that like button as it helps me out a lot, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. I usually do videos about economic topics or self-development, so if that's something you're interested in, go ahead. So how do you get a second passport, and is it even legal for everyone? For most people, it is possible, yes. Many countries allow their citizens to have a second passport under special circumstances, like frequent travel or security concerns. The thing is, not all countries allow second passports. In Germany, for example, you have to prove a valid reason, like frequent necessary travel or visa conflicts, to be issued a second passport. And they actually do want you to explain your individual situation and hand in a letter from your employer or something similar if you're self-employed. And also, then it's only valid for 6 years instead of 10. In the US, a second passport is usually valid for 4 years and is given to people with a justified need, such as journalists or frequent travelers. And the UK officially issues you a second passport if you travel between countries with conflicts. But in these two places, I don't have any experience since I'm not a citizen. If you are interested in getting a second passport from your country, do check with your passport office or consulate to see if it's possible and what the requirements are. So the countries we just talked about are pretty chill about this, but not all countries see it that way. While it's quite common in many places, some countries don't allow dual passports. For example, some African or South American countries might find it suspicious that you have two. If immigration officials suspect that you have a second passport, which in the worst case you didn't present to them, they might suspect something and question you more thoroughly, which in the worst case might result in denying you entry. So the best practice is definitely to always use the same passport to enter and exit a country. And if you need to present both, because for example you have a visa in one of them, then do so proactively. But what happens if you only present one passport? Many travelers with two passports choose to only show one when entering a country. In most cases, I do too, because I just generally assume the officials don't really care. But in some cases, that could backfire, and actually it has happened to me. So let me give you some examples. Case number one, an immigration officer might notice something odd. If they see stamps from a country that you technically couldn't have visited with the passport you're presenting because you have some of the stamps in the other passport, they might suspect you have another one and question you. Case number two, some countries track entry and exit records. If you enter with one passport but try to exit with the other one, this could definitely cause some issues, especially in countries with strict immigration laws. And case number three, and this is the most important one, you might be accused of visa fraud or other criminal activities. If you used one country to get a visa and then used the other one to try to enter the country, or if you present a completely empty passport without any stamps in the middle of nowhere, an immigration officer might think you're hiding something. For example, they could think that you used up all your visa-free days in a country and you now try to get back in with a different passport, and that is actually what happened to me in Mexico. So I was at the land border going from Belize to Mexico, and since the exit stamp of Belize actually used up the very last spot in my now full passport, I presented the Mexican officer my almost empty second passport. So after going through it a couple of times, searching more stamps from other countries, he looked at me really angry and asked if I had a second passport that I was hiding from him. So I handed him the other one where he did find the stamps that he was looking for, but instead of letting me into the country, he aggressively asked me again why I hadn't handed it to him right away. So then I told him the reason, but he was still suspicious and took both my passports to the room in the back. So then a while later he came back, and to my luck, since it was late at night and the officer probably didn't want any trouble at that time, and also the other officer that was sitting next to him was actually the guy that stamped me out of Mexico just a few days before and remembered me, he eventually just let me go. And probably also because I actually didn't have to hide anything. But I have to admit, as someone with a German passport where the entry to Mexico usually takes around 20 seconds, and this time I was there for like 5 to 10 minutes without knowing what's going on, it was really stressful. Especially knowing that some people do get their entry rejected because of suspicious officers. So definitely use them wisely and think about when to use which passport. So should you get a second passport? Well, that depends on your situation. If you travel frequently and need to apply for visas while still being able to travel, a second passport is incredibly useful. If you often visit countries with political tensions and want to avoid complications at border control, having two passports can help. And if you just want a safety net in case you lose your passport, a second one is a great backup. However, this shouldn't be your main reason, since losing your passport has some long-term consequences you don't want to deal with. Whether you have one or two doesn't matter. However, if you don't travel internationally often, or if you only go to visa-free destinations, you probably don't need one. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you liked the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.